and welcome to Curio Chronicles. I am Nathan, your curator of curiosity here at Curioporium, located in Factory Square in Southington, Connecticut. And this is episode 2 of our podcast, which we are calling Energy of the Curious Kind. Energy is all around us, it surrounds us, it's in us, it's almost in every single object. But what do you define as energy? What one person thinks of as energy, another person may think of as some sort of paranormal power, or another person may think of it as their aura in it's manifesting in some type of energy. So we wanted to delve into energy since it's such a huge part of what Curioporium is here and its makeup, and every object that's here. So please join us as we discuss energy of the curious kind.
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
So, what is energy, and especially what's energy of the curious kind? Those are two really good questions. At its foundation, again, this is my belief of what energy is. I guess a lot of people will liken it, say, "Oh, it's the force. It moves through us. It's with us. It's a partnership of us." Some of what George Lucas wrote about the force is accurate in a lot of different religions that he did draw from. Energy is, I think, at the core of every single person, every single object, every single animal, everything around us. Yes, just like the Force, except there's, midichlorians, there is this tying energy. And I think over time, that definition of what the energy is has changed. Is it something physical? Is it something you can't touch? Is it an energy that's tied to religion? These are all really good points, but from my perspective, I'm really interested in that energy of the curious kind. And what I mean is, say you're out and about and having a nice weekend and you're going antiquing and you're in an antique store and you've never been there before, but you see something and it's people say it's calling to you for some reason, might whatever it is, and you just have a real affinity for it. It's drawing you in. It wants to be picked up. It wants to be discovered. Right there for me, that's an energy between whatever it is you're looking at and yourself, and it goes deeper than that. What is this object? Why is it drawing you? Why is it looking? For me, objects, especially used objects, thrown away objects, they're looking for something. They had a purpose. They no longer have a purpose until somebody gives them a new purpose. And just like sitting there in that antique store and holding, whatever the little curiosity is that you found, you start to kind of think, hey, I need to take this home. Something bridges the gap between, hey, this is something that would look really cool on my mantle versus this is something that speaks to me. I hear that a lot here at Curioporium, where people say, hey, I don't know what this is, but I need to buy it because it speaks to me. It's the energy that's speaking to you. And I can say that wholeheartedly because every single thing that comes in here, especially the items that are found on our curio hunts, estate sales, things like that, have that certain energy. While I can go to, let's say, an estate sale and there's just table upon table upon table of great things, only a select few actually make their way here into Curioporium. And first and foremost, it's that energy that I feel for it. I personally love old things. I've always been a big tag sale person, but not just going, a tag sale. You're rummaging through somebody's life. Let's put that out there first. That's exactly what you're doing. You are either rummaging through someone's life who's trying to get rid of things, or you're rummaging actually through the life of somebody who's passed away. And all those are different energies. With every object becomes a different energy. It's also the purpose, the intended purpose gives it an energy, um, one way or the other, good or bad. So when I'm looking for something, I'm not saying what's the creepiest thing, what's the oddest thing, what thing would make people go wow. Those don't really enter my mind. It's very personal. I'm not thinking about the shop. I'm not thinking about guests and customers and what they might like. If it doesn't draw me in, then there's really no value for me in obtaining that piece. It's then I'm just buying stuff to resell, and that's something that's very important in looking at different energies, just all based on who you are. I think that informs my energy, and my perception of energy has greatly informed what I look for. Even as a young kid, as little Nathan, I did have this same affinity, and I can tell a quick story. Growing up, before I moved out of my childhood home, and there was a duplex down in Hartford, and we shared this duplex with an older couple, and he stayed to himself. Maybe they'd have me come over, and do some little chores or something. I was fairly little, and I remember when the husband passed away, and there was bags of stuff on the street, and I'd always grown up garbage picking. That was a good Saturday Sunday family activity. And I remember as a kid grabbing these plastic bags, and I remember the feel of the plastic bags and ripping them open. And I remember the first one I opened was filled with little boxes. And as I opened it, this was God, I must have been 7 maybe, had no real concept of anything. They were all metals. They were all war medals. And the only one that I do remember, it looked like they were in possibly the Navy. And I remember one was a Purple Heart. Have no idea where they are. But as I started digging deeper into these bags, it gave me a perspective feeling on who was this neighbor. And I felt this energy, this presence, because I think those can be one and the same, um, looking over my shoulder. And I was rummaging through this man who I had lived next to, scared old man. I was scared of the old man. Um, but I was really looking through his life. And I just remember that at a very early age and had a profound respect, not ripping through and seeing, could I be the fastest to find something later on when, I really started going to tag sales and things. Um, the deep, heavy thoughts for a 7-year-old. But again, I've talked about it a little bit before, and probably will in the future. I've just had a very different upbringing, and was very much not a kid, and older than I actually was. So way back then, this thing of energy had been surrounding me, and old things, antique things, vintage things, used things, discarded things that were used to be repurposed to live on. And it was this drive within me that I started calling like an energy. And for myself, it wasn't just this energy that I feel coming off of an object or a person. It was like a living thing inside of me that had many different sides. It's kind of like, this energy Nathan in there, if you will, that had many different sides. Um, and it would perk up and be alive for certain things. It would warn me of certain things. It really stood out to me that this was not just a singular thing that had to do with objects. And I was always into art and music, and I started noticing a different type of energy when I was doing art, or music, or when my mother, she was an artist, when I would watch her, and it was almost palpable. It was hard to describe, but it was almost palpable. And this is kind of the creative energy that kind of spun around my head and spun around my life as a youth. Um, as the world of curiosity started to open up to me, which I didn't know, at the time, and using it in different ways. Now being 50 years old, I can put a name to it. I can see the trajectory of it. I believe last the podcast kind of spoke about it, from my youth up until now, how everything was leading up to that. And it is this curious energy that's always been inside of me. It's inside of a lot of people. I hear a lot of stories. A lot start in their childhood. I mean, when you're a child, I firmly believe you are the most open to whether you want to call it otherworldly things, ghosts, paranormal, whatever is the word that you use. I believe that as a child, you're both a receiver and a transmitter. Is kind of how I see it. You may not understand how to use it, but you use it. And just follow me for a second here, because I have a lot of these thoughts. Let's talk about imaginary friends. You talk to any child who has an imaginary friend, and they swear they are real. I mean, you can go online, whether they're real or not, and see photos that were taken that happened to capture. I think there's one like at a McDonald's where a kid's in a playscape and a mother was taking a picture, and it looked like some guy inside of like this plaything, and the mother asked the child, "Who is that?" And he was like, "That's my my friend." See, if you ask a kid, it's their friend. They don't say, "This is my invisible friend." I believe, like with my invisible friends, like I could fully see them. They were formed, they were there. Why can't you see them? And I think that's why the children, I say, have this affinity to be open to receive. But they also have the ability to transmit this energy, I think. At least I felt that I did. I felt that if I was on a walk in the woods somewhere, that I had this energy that was both inward facing and outward facing. Again, not knowing how to describe it, not knowing how to put names to it. He thought, hey, it's normal. And there's so many stories that people have that, they were a child or very young when they heard their first voice, or they think they saw their first apparition or ghost, or sense something paranormal. And of course, as you grow up and you get older, reality sets in, rationalization, science, the whole thing. And I do believe that receiver transmitter part starts to dim. If you don't use something, you lose something. It's the same thing with this facet of what I call the curious energy. You lose it, or it lays dormant. Some people are of the mind that something happens, they believe it happens, but then they just go on their life like, oh, I just deny it, and they forget about it. I mean, there's movies about this, books have been written about it, fiction books and fictional movies and horror films about this. But it was always my fascination with that part, that transmitting, that receiving, that extended to objects, people, then to places. um Sometimes it is hard to describe. And some people I've spoken with, I've been fortunate enough to be able to give words to kind of what they were feeling. And this was a thing as of growing up. I was the strange kid in the group, and oh, do you feel strange energy, Nathan? And ha ha ha, funny. And of course, you forget it. You become a teen, and that's not cool. And there's all these different things that go into it about why that energy, I think, dims. But for me, it was always there, and it was how I perceived it, how I guess you could say, I don't want to say used it, but how I was in partnership with this curious energy, this facet of the curious energy. And right now, I'm specifically speaking about the paranormal, I guess, energy activity um, aspect of it, in terms of, like I said, objects, places. Um, Objects, I have collected things ever since I can remember. And they're just not your normal things. They're just certain things that for some reason, that when I hold them in my hand, or I'm not saying I'm psychic, I'm not saying I read auras, What I'm saying is, for me, this kinship between myself and, especially, let's take dolls. I've collected and been fascinated with dolls, ever since, my little doll Honey that I held on to and still do, that's here in the shop. You know, dolls are a great example of a couple different types of this curious energy. I think dolls hold energy, they exude energy, they seek out energy, they block energy. Dolls in and of themselves, when we do, in a later episode, a deep dive into dolls, a lot of dolls were created for this specific purpose, for soothing a child, for making them almost as totems. They would call them poppets, um, to give to a child. There was a meaning to dolls, not just a plaything. And of course, over time, it became a plaything. Then it became just for girl. This the whole line. But at their core, what is a doll if it doesn't have? It's built for a specific purpose. It's created for a specific purpose, for a specific energy. A lot of people, dolls are creepy. They're creepy. Is it the feeling you're getting from them? Is it how they look? Like right now on the podcast table, there's a baby doll with blood on its feet, and it's, one eye's rolled back, and it's just looks, people be like, oh, it's gruesome. I think it's the sweetest thing. It's got its energy. It's not malevolent. It's what you put in. Quick side story, there are two very, very old vintage antique dolls here on display that purportedly had come from an orphanage. And they had like a lot of lineage. They were used and they were donated and everything. The energy that these two dolls give off for me is a longing. These two dolls, if I imagine, were probably given to these children who were brought to the orphanage to soothe them, to help them through this ordeal that they were facing. That was the sole purpose of these two dolls: consoler, protector, friend. That's like heavy duty energy around them. And when they came to me, I just had this feeling of incompleteness when I was holding them. They're old, filled with straw, but there's something palpable about them when I held them. And then knowing the story of what their purpose, what their energy was supposed to be for these children, they're just lonely. And that's the energy I was feeling, this loneliness. If they just wanted that other half to kind of complete them, that child's hand holding theirs. So there's no doubt in my mind, like I know now, like the energy for these two dolls that's here, they're in, with a bunch of friends. They see kids every day. It's lighter. It was darker. For me, energies have, color, whether someone's like, oh, it's auras and, all that. No, their color, it was a bluish gray. And it has changed over time from being here inside Curioporium. And that energy for an inanimate object is something that I think does carry over to the paranormal. If you think of it this way, if there's an entity or something, there's all the number of ways of contacting, and it's whether it's pushing an item, it's something to do sometimes when it's reacting with the physical world with something. A picture turns over. There's all deeper meanings to those. I think, these entities are able to do that because there is some energy, let's say, linking an entity of someone's mother who passed of cancer, and a picture that keeps falling. And it's a picture maybe of her, of the mother that passed. And I think with that connection, it makes these types of energies stronger. and they weave in and out of things, and they weave in and out of our lives, and it's just, how do we look at them? How do we perceive them? Are we a receiver still? But also, I think more often than not, we're a transmitter. And what I mean by that is transmitting your energy into things. And I highly believe this. If there is items that come from a house, and if I happen to know the background of the house, if the house was getting if this stuff was getting, sold off because, the people passed away. I've been at ones where there was a murder in the house, and they decided to just, they moved and they need to get rid of things. There's all a number of reasons. I firmly believe that the people living in there, even you, maybe sitting at home, you are imbuing your energy onto these things around you just as much as they are to you. And I think with this curious energy, when we start putting multiple people in the mix and emotion in the mix, I think emotion is one of the purest, rawest forms of this energy. It can become polluted. It could become a crystal clear glass of water in one household, and it could be a ink filled cloudy glass of water in another. And depending on what this object is, I think some objects, such as dolls, things that represent maybe animals, things that, are alive, can attract this energy that you may be spewing forth when you're arguing, yelling, screaming. If it's an abusive home, if it's, a depressive atmosphere, if it's, I think those things seep in and they don't go away. And that doesn't necessarily mean that whatever it seeps into an object is good or bad. I think it's intention. I think if, say, it's in a house and there's a doll and it's, an intention of, I don't know, let's just say a child, and they're angry and they're ripping at it, and they're really focusing all this anger into this doll. Again, you guys, it's movies. I mean, there's movies that, so these ideas have been there and they've just been kind of translated through kind of like this film of fiction and horror. But I believe it's absolutely true. I don't believe anything is innately evil. But I do believe there's energy. There's the negative energy. That's why people come in here. What's the hauntedest thing I'll find in here? Well, you won't find anything haunted in here in the way that the majority of the people think of something being haunted. What's the most evil thing? Same thing. You'll find things with heavy, heavy energy, depressive energy, but you're not going to find something that's going to attach to you and possess you and all these things. Some places do, they procure and curate those, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but it's just not what I myself am doing with Curioporium and these energies, these curious energies. So back to this paranormal feeling. There's different levels. There's the feeling you get when you walk into a room. Hair stands up on the back. Someone just, I feel like somebody just walked over my grave. There's all these sayings, but I don't think there's real acknowledgement of what these things mean. Let's take for instance, cemeteries. On one hand, you have people that believe cemeteries are the most evil place because it's filled with the dead. Then you have other people who love to take picnics. I mean, that was a big thing during Victorian times. Of course, whether or not everything goes back to Victorian times, no matter what it is, it always goes back. I mean, that was posh. Not just, you would go, you would have a big lunch or visit, with so and so was in your family who's buried there. Others, going on a date because it was rich in history, and these are your relatives and ancestors. And So a lot of people are like, I want to, there's a thing. If you're going to pass a cemetery, you're supposed to hold your breath. I think it's an old wives' tale. If you're walking or driving past a cemetery, you're supposed to hold your breath before you get to it, and you're not supposed to exhale and breathe again until you pass a church. I believe that's how it goes. But cemeteries, to me, give off a couple different types of energy. One of the most overwhelming energies that I feel from any cemetery I go to is loss. That's the first thing, loss. This is the first thing that usually I feel. But then, as I start to learn the history of a cemetery, start to read the epitaphs on, everything described on the tombstones, start to learn about the people that are buried there. That energy to me changes to a little sense of longing, to this sense of, hey, get to know me. I'm here, get to know more about me, more about my life. And I've always felt that. This is contrary to some people who say, hey, I ghost hunt and I'm gonna go into the cemetery and, make something happen. For myself, that's not my cup of tea. It's not my bag. I'm more of the line of, where is this energy going to lead me? But again, in order to do that, you have to be both a receiver and a transmitter. See, it goes back to that, a receiver and a transmitter. And by being that, in that moment, in that place, curious things happen. Curious energy happens. Why am I drawn to this headstone versus the other? Why do I feel this sense of apprehension when I'm reading this gravestone? It's because this energy exists in multiple areas within yourself, outside of yourself, multiple realms, between the veils. The veil between, often used simply as the veil between this life and the otherworldly, the ghost world, the veil. It permeates all of it. It moves. It changes. It's curious. It's fickle. But not everybody feels this energy. It's a tombstone. It's a graveyard. It's where people go and die. I guess they, they're neither a transmitter nor a receiver, and it's never innately evil. Let me say that it's never innately evil. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about God. I'm not talking about Satan and the devil. I'm talking about energy. The way we perceive it, if we can, where it comes from, what objects give it off, what people give it off. You hear it all the time. They just had such a negative energy, I could not. Well, where does that come from? That comes deep down your little antennas. Something sparked it, was strong enough to spark, to say, hey, listen, I don't like this energy. Let's back away. Conversely, I like this energy. Let's go closer. It makes me feel this way. And it's a dangerous, dangerous thing. It's up for interpretation of what it is, what you do with it. I'm not a guru. I'm not a psychic. I'm not, any of these things. I don't purport myself to be. It's just what I feel and what I believe. And if you can understand some of the things that I'm saying about this little aspect of curious energy, you're probably, Maybe you're a transmitter and receiver, a little bit of both, more than one than the other, which can happen. You can have people that's a one-way street. I just feel things coming into me. I can't communicate with them. Um, you have others who, it's a two-way street. It's an open microphone. It's an open conversation, a dialogue. Whereas others, it's just pure feeling. Other people's, the energy takes the form of colors, auras, which can go from objects to people. But what do you make of it? That's the important part. It's not reading books about it and learning. Of course, it's good to do that. But first, you have to start with, what does this curious energy mean to you? Do you want to cultivate it? Did you cultivate it? Do you not? It's a muscle. If you don't flex and use it, it gets atrophied, and it's useless. So again, kind of bringing this back to Curioporium, there, when you come in, there is no choice not, let's say, no choice not to feel any energy. Whether you're a skeptic and you come in and, oh, this is just tchotchke stuff, which I've heard, and and you leave. I've had conversations with some of those individuals that then came back and said, you know what, there was just something I felt here. And this is a big old conglomeration of all different types of energy with one thing in common: it's not malicious. It's not malicious. Found items, created curiosities, created oddities, all those things. And it's that curious energy that sparks things for people when they come into the shop. But also, as time has gone on in the last year, I'm starting to see more and more people come in with stories of this so-called curious energy, whether they feel it, they've seen it. Long conversations. Had a 3-hour conversation with someone last week about their energy and them being a receiver and a transmitter from an early age. That this person would come in and share some deeply personal things with me in the shop could not have happened any other place, or so I believe. It could not. I firmly believe that it allowed them to be open, first by allowing them to be comfortable in their surroundings, allowed them, they even said that they can fully be them. And I fully saw this individual. And as we discussed energies and things in her life, and, other presence, and all the things that go along with this, I personally saw, when it first began, you know, the energy was very tight and restrained and guarded. And then by the end of our conversation, it was gone. That wall of energy that had been so put up. And she had felt that too. And again, I don't believe that was meant for that time in this place for this individual and I to share this curious energy. And a lot of things she didn't have names to put to them, but at the end she did. And the whole thing with energy, whether you're a child, you're old, whatever, every single person, I believe, has the ability to cultivate this curious energy, to sense it. Stronger people then communicate in certain ways with it. It allows you to see, it takes over your senses. That smell that nobody can smell, that sound that nobody can hear only except for you, the touch, the feeling of a wind on you when you're in a room and everyone's like, there's no wind in this room. The energy is going and making itself known in multiple different ways. And I think the biggest thing, at least for myself, is for, years of, I'd have moments. I have moments of clarity, as some people say, that I got scared, that I touched too far, I felt too much, it became too real, and then shut it off for years. And this happened on and off, on and off, on and off, and only recently, in the last 4 years, is understanding how much a part of this curious energy is a part of me, and then seeing it and discovering it in people, discovering it in my family, my kids, in every individual that comes in here. It amazes me, and it's hard often to describe. You'll have one individual with this energy around them, which you can feel it, that they know they're so intelligent, they're they know about things that are curious. And then you have a 4-year-old running around the shop with just this unfiltered, fire hose on full curious energy spraying everywhere. And there's a mix to that. So a lot of times when you do hear me talking or discussing, a lot of times you will hear me say the energy this, the energy that, not, oh, the ghost, the paranormal, the feeling. Those are words that have just kind of encapsulated and categorized these types of energy. For me, it's just seeing it on a different level, and just trying, when I have conversations with people, then they start to see things on a little bit different level. And I want, like, when I go out searching for things for the store, I want to feel that energy. It's That's what I'm going for. I'm not going for, wow, this is going to be an estate sale with so much stuff. Like, I do research. Who sold the house? Who are these people? What's going on? What am I going to be? What am I in for? There's a lot of that work. I'd love to show the process. It's like a big planning process, out before you're going from a mission. Okay, here's the dossier on each member, and this is what we could find, and oh, they were in the news, and you know, I feel honored to go out and buy these things and be able to purchase these things, where most people would say, it's transactional. I'm going to a tax sale. I'm buying this because I need this. So being cognizant of that, I think the object itself knows. That vintage metal tray knows if it's bound for a china cabinet, eBay, or it's going to be part of a display here. Like, it knows. Call me, I don't, you call me weird, odd, but I truly believe that it knows what it's destined for, and it will act accordingly. Or it won't act accordingly, because some things you may buy, you ever buy anything and you're like, I'm going to use it for this, and no matter what you do, it just will not work. Whether it's buying something for an art piece or to refinish a chair or to decorate, like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work until it wants to work where it should work. That happens all the time. That's why if you see stuff scattered on the floor, it wants to be there. This wants to be hanging upside down from the ceiling. This mirror above the cash register wanted to be on the ceiling to watch every single person come through. And the lucky few that look up and are like, oh, I didn't know there was a mirror there. Well, it's watching you. Those are the things that I love about curiosity and curious energy. And there's so many opportunities to discover it here at Curio Emporium, and there's so many, I'm just speaking to that. I've taken all these things of energy and brought them together under, one roof. In learning that and understanding that, and hopefully in later episodes when we delve in more into what, everyone's calling the paranormal and energies and ghosts and all of that, those things that fascinated me as a kid, remembering that it's the energy that comes through. for things. Don't have that be lost. Next time when you're going to Brimfield, like this time of year, or you're going, you're going tax sailing or something, just for a minute when you pull up, say, I'm going to let this energy, like, who are these people? Why? Like, look at everything. Why was their taste like this? Is there stuff from all over the world? Were they travelers? Just think about that while you're shopping for these things, and while you're looking to discover, while you're on your curio hunt. That's what I call it when I go out. It's a curio hunt. What energies are you feeling? What calls to you? What do you want to bring home and introduce to the energies that are there in your house, to all the curious energies that are there, especially if you're a vintage and antique collector, or a collector of, as they say, the occult or something like that. You need to curate that. A spoon is never just a spoon. Let's say that. A spoon is never just a spoon. I have a spoon in here from the 1800s. I want to know what the story is. Did it come from, it's heavy, it's pewter. Was this a spoon from, somebody who lived on the streets, because they would carry, their spoon with them. So when they would go to public houses, they'd be able to eat, things like that. That's the curious energy that I'm after. And also for other people to discover, or if they have discovered it, to work with it so it can grow. So next time when you go out and you're doing that, think of the energy. And the biggest thing you can do is just discover it and stay curious. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Curio Chronicles. I am Nathan, your curator of curiosity. Thank you for joining, and can't wait for you to join us next time.